In 1920, one of the most famous football players in all of American history got sick, and then he got locked out of his dorm in the snow and died shortly thereafter. Decades later, a man named Jim Hunt snapped this photo, and he says that it's undeniable proof that this football player now haunts the college where he died. American football is a huge pastime in the United States, and it's had a professional sports league for over 100 years now. And during that time, believe it or not, many strange and haunting things have happened with this game. We thought for Super Bowl 59, we would share a couple of those hauntings with you, culminating with the details of perhaps the most famous haunting of all, the haunting of Notre Dame. If you've ever wanted to know the details of that haunting, then stick with us. Then in our Fact or Fiction segment, we'll take a closer look at these hauntings and see if these events really were hauntings or if there is another explanation. Then Amy is going to come on and she's going to share how many sports players today engage in superstitious activity with the belief that it truly helps them win games, and they just might be right. So this report begins in 2013. On Sunday, February 3rd, 2013, a ghost got into the electrical system of Super Bowl 47, and it forever immortalized this game between San Francisco and Baltimore. From the very beginning, the Baltimore Ravens dominated the game, and they quickly created a 7-3 lead over San Francisco. Then, in the second quarter, they further advanced their lead by scoring 2 more times, and only allowing San Francisco to get a field goal, bringing the score to 21 Ravens and only 6 49ers. So by the midpoint of this game, many people thought that, well, for all intents and purposes, the Ravens had it in the bag. Then, during the first part of the third quarter, the Ravens scored again, making the score now 28-6, and it was quickly becoming a slaughter. But then something happened, and it almost changed the course of this game. Why it happened is just speculation, but Amy did some digging, and there are rumors, which we'll get into in just a second. But first, what happened? Well, unexpectedly, and to everyone's surprise, the stadium lights just went out, and everything was dark. The lights remained out for a whopping 35 minutes. Both teams stopped playing, and fans just sat murmuring, wondering what in the world was going on. This was a first in Super Bowl history. Players from both teams just stretched out over the field and waited. Many fans said that during this time, they felt as if the spirit of victory was shifting from the Baltimore Ravens to the San Francisco 49ers. Dozens of people later said that there definitely was something in the air, and it really did feel as if the energy were changing. The lights finally came back on and play resumed. Instantly, the 49ers started to make a comeback with 2 touchdowns and a recovered fumble, and within just 4 short minutes, the 49ers had gained 17 points, basically bringing them back from the brink of death. So, what happened? Well, rumor has it that during the halftime break, while Beyoncé was performing for the crowd, a group of overzealous fans that just couldn't bear to see the 49ers lose met up with a self-proclaimed witch, and together they cast a darkening spell over the entire stadium. The incantation took less than 5 minutes to chant, but when Beyoncé was done and the game resumed, well, that's when those lights went out. Coincidence? Maybe. Ultimately, the 49ers did not win, but they came a lot closer than anyone thought they would, with a final score of Ravens 34 and 49ers 31. Football fans know that if a team finds itself in a slump with very few victories over a long enough period of time, there is often talk that that team is cursed. But for the most part, no one really believes that that team has a real life hex on it. Or do they? On January 11, 1970, the Kansas City Chiefs defeated the Minnesota Vikings, and they won Super Bowl number 4. As you can imagine, the team was jazzed. But then something happened, and the Chiefs found themselves in one of those slumps. But this was no ordinary slump. Not only did the Chiefs not return to the Super Bowl for quite a while, they wouldn't see a single Super Bowl win for over 50 years. At first, no one really thought anything of it, but after a while, people started to talk. Could this be a real curse? Then, on January 4th, 2019, a couple of diehard Chiefs fans, Anthony Stratton and Gary McKenzie, who operate the online forum called the Arrowhead Guys, that's a forum that's everything Chiefs, brought the famed medium Vicki Millard to the Arrowhead Stadium to see if she could pick anything up and maybe break this curse. Interestingly, as soon as they arrived, Vicki said that her stomach began to feel queasy, and she said that there was a questionable spirit in the air. Then she walked the grounds, and as she did, she said that she could feel the spirit of a man lingering in the stadium, and she could see this man in her mind's eye. She described him, and she said that he was wearing a brown suit. Then at one point, the group passed an area where there were several historical photos displayed. One of the photos was of a man named Hank Stram. Hank Stram was the head coach who had led the Chiefs to their victory in 1970. Vicki said that the man in the photo was the man that was lingering around the stadium. She said that she felt as if his spirit had some unfinished business with the team. Well, it turns out that Stram was one of the best coaches that the league had ever had, and although he had led the Chiefs to victory in 1970, he was fired just a few years later under questionable circumstances, which, she says, created a massive amount of negative energy, and this negative energy went into the team in the form of a curse. Vicki said that the good news was that Stram had finally made peace in his soul, and he was at the point where he could let go of this negative energy.
He's ready to let it go. He's ready for the Chiefs to have another win. He's a Chief fan through and through. I think he's almost to the point where he might be ready to help from the other side. Sort of like a Hank in heaven.
Now, here's the interesting part. Vicki walked the grounds, and she said this in January of 2019. And guess who won the Super Bowl for the 2019 season? That's right, the Kansas City Chiefs. Believe it or not, finally, after a 50-year shutout, on Super Bowl Sunday, February 2nd, 2020, the Kansas City Chiefs defeated the San Francisco 49ers with a score of 31-20. George Gipp had one of those bigger-than-life personalities and an irresistible smile. He was the kind of guy that brought the magic with him when he walked into a room, and everyone knew that if he wanted to, George Gipp could write his own ticket and become anything he desired in life. At the same time, no one really believed that he would ever amount to anything. See, George was a hustler, and instead of applying himself, he used his brains and good looks to be a big fish in a little pond. When he wasn't working, and that was just about all of the time, he was either playing poker or hustling pool. He was born February 18, 1895, in a small mining town in Michigan. His father was a Baptist preacher, and his mother was a loving homemaker. He was the seventh of 8 children, and even though he was very intelligent, he dropped out of school in his senior year. The one thing that he did have going for him, and the one thing that he did take seriously, was his ability to play sports. His body was perfectly fit, and many people said that his agilities bordered on magical. Growing up, whenever the boys would get together and play ball, George was always picked first, and everyone always wanted George on his team. And if George was ever going to be anything in life, well, it was going to be in sports, preferably baseball. George loved baseball, and he played as often as he could, hoping that a talent scout would catch him playing and then recruit him. One day, one of his friends, who was attending college at Notre Dame, was in town, and he saw George playing baseball. When he got back to the college, he told the coach just how well George played. Well, the coach checked it out for himself, and shortly after that, even though George did not have a high school diploma, he received a letter from Notre Dame offering him a full scholarship, and all he had to do was play baseball. A short while later, George found himself checking into Notre Dame and meeting his new coach. And from the very start, his coach could see that George was going to be a problem. George was good, and he knew he was good, and he wasn't about to take orders from some coach. And in his very first game, he did the exact opposite of what his coach told him to do. The team just needed him to get on base, so George was told to bunt and then run to first base. But it was hot, and George just shook his head, grabbed the bat, walked up to the plate, and then knocked the ball out of the park. He wasn't about to run the bases on such a hot day, and he thought, well, if he just knocked the ball out of the park, he would be able to walk the bases. Even though he got that home run, his coach was furious. How could he coach a team with a hot dog like George on it? Well, the two got into a shouting match, and then George, he just quit right then and there. And that might have been the end of the story if George hadn't been such an exceptional athlete. A few days later, before George had departed the college, he and a buddy of his were out on the football field just goofing off when another coach, a man by the name of Newt Rockne, happened to be passing by. Although George was just playing around, he was making field goals from the 60-yard line. Well, Rockne approached George, and before long, he convinced him to transfer his scholarship and come and play football. And just like that, George Gipp went from baseball player to football player. And although this seemed to be the first step into a brighter future, it would actually be the one choice that would ultimately take George's life. Being careful to hold the reins very lightly and stroking his ego just at the right times, Coach Rockne knew exactly how to handle George, and George quickly became a football sensation. During his 4-year career, Notre Dame only lost 2 games. Not 2 games a season, but 2 games for the entire 4 years. Even though Rockne knew how to handle George as far as football was concerned, no one knew how to handle George as far as life was concerned. And George lived like there was no tomorrow. Whenever he wasn't out on the field playing football, he could be found drinking and either playing poker or hustling pool. And even with that type of lifestyle, he still made it all work. Somehow, he could miss several practice games throughout the week, stay up partying all night long before a big game, and then, incredibly, still lead his team to victory the next day.
And he didn't always show up at practice, but Rock didn't seem to mind, because he knew George was something special. And the players didn't object, because everybody liked him a lot. He was a very friendly fella, and very handsome.
To stop Gipp on the run was about as easy as damming Niagara Falls, and an opposing runner needed an airplane to get to him.
The girls would have given anything to meet and go out with him, but George stayed aloof, more interested in his poker, pool, and football.
George Gipp pushed himself so hard that he built up a reputation for being invincible both on and off of the field. And we don't have time to go into all of his antics, but just to give you an idea of what type of guy this was, while he was leading his team to such amazing victories year after year, he was also repeatedly getting into trouble. He continuously broke campus rules. He was often found out after curfew, and at one point, he even got expelled for gambling. But his contribution to the team was considered so valuable that his coach got the entire town to sign a petition to reinstate him. Business owners said that they just felt more comfortable investing in the university if George Gipp was on the football team. His reinstatement, however, only encouraged him to push himself harder. And during a game with Indiana, he fractured his collarbone. And because he wouldn't rest properly, he caught strep throat. Now, here's where things really get crazy. There was a game scheduled with Northwest on Saturday, November 20th, 1920. And earlier that day, before the game, George saw the doctor about his sore throat. The doctor told him that because of his broken collarbone and his strep throat, that he had no choice. He had to skip the game and go straight home and go straight to bed. And if he didn't, his condition would definitely get worse. Well, George left the doctor's office and he went straight to the game, where he played flawlessly with a broken collarbone and strep throat. And as usual, Notre Dame won with a score of 33-7. Now, this may sound a little un-American to some of you, but I'm really not a big football fan. But when Amy was sharing this part with me, I couldn't help but think of someone like Captain America on the football field. How is it even possible for someone to play football with a broken collarbone and strep throat and crush the competition? After the game, any normal person in his condition would go home and go to bed. But not George. He had to go out and celebrate. They did win, after all. As a matter of fact, he celebrated for quite a while. Some sources say that he celebrated for 4 days straight before finally making his way back to the campus. After curfew on Wednesday, November 24th, 1920, someone saw George passed out in the snow, nearly frozen to death at the university just outside of Washington Hall. He was immediately taken to the hospital, where he managed to hold on until the second week in December. Then, on December 14th, 1920, just past 3 a.m., Notre Dame lost one of the best football players in all of American history when George Gipp died. But that wasn't the end of the story. Right around Christmas Eve, just 10 days after George Gipp died, 8 students living on campus in Washington Hall were startled by the sound of a French horn coming from everywhere and nowhere. The students searched high and low, but they could not locate the source of the sound. Some people say that the sound was a lot like the victory cry at a football game. Shortly after this, beginning in January of 1921, students walking in Washington Hall began feeling someone pat them on the shoulder. When they would look, no one would be there. George was known to give an encouraging pat as people walked by. Other people have reported hearing footsteps when no one was around. In 1926, a highly respected Brazilian student named Pio Montejaneiro said that he saw the ghost of George Gipp riding a white horse into Washington Hall. Strangely, throughout the 1930s and 40s, others have also said that they too have seen George Gipp on a white horse riding into Washington Hall. On September 29, 1968, just before midnight, 4 students met in Washington Hall planning on creating a hoax that would further the ghost story of George Gipp. They had a camera, a white sheet, and a football helmet. They got all set up, they turned out the lights, and they took several ghostly pictures. But when they finished, the lights wouldn't come back on. As the boys stood there in the darkness, they said that they got the strange feeling that someone else was in the hall with them. Then they heard the sound of creaking footsteps. Then they saw a flash of light and they heard a muffled moan. Then they all bolted for the exit. One of the students involved in this hoax gone wrong was a man by the name of Jim Brogan. He was so shaken up by what had happened that he just couldn't stop thinking about it. And in the spring of 1971, he organized another group of students to go back into the hall and try to get to the bottom of all of these hauntings. One of the students with him was a photographer named Jim Hunt. The boys spent several nights in the hall, but nothing ever happened. Then, on their last night, May 3rd, 1971, right around 1 a.m., they all said that they saw a transparent light green figure floating on the left side of the balcony. And just like in 1968, everyone bolted for the door. But as Jim Hunt was running out, he managed to snap this photo. The boys were pale and visibly terrified when they shared their experience. And to this day, they never have changed their story. So, how much of this report is true? Well, the lights really did go out for just over a half an hour during Super Bowl 47, and the 49ers did make an incredible comeback and almost win. But except for rumors, there really is no other evidence that an actual witch cast some kind of spell of darkness over the stadium. And as far as the Kansas City Chiefs being cursed and then that curse being lifted, well, believe it or not, everything we shared about that story happened just as we shared it. But many teams go without a Super Bowl win for years. I would be willing to bet that it was probably just a coincidence that psychic Mickey Millard called that curse lifted just before the Chiefs won the Super Bowl. What about Notre Dame? Well, many people who have looked deeply into that story say that although it's frequently told that George Gipp played his last game with a broken collarbone and strep throat, then partied for 4 days before being found passed out in the snow, it's much more likely that he contracted strep throat after his last game, and rumors of his death have been greatly exaggerated. That being said, there have literally been thousands of reports through the years of people seeing his ghost or feeling his presence in Washington Hall. As far as the photograph that Jim Hunt claims to have taken of George Gipps's ghost, well, all we have to go on for that is Jim Hunt's word. Interestingly, Amy found out that many professional athletes engage in superstitious activity with the belief that it'll actually help them win games. Well, here's Amy, the researcher.
Okay, thanks. Well, I was thinking we are talking about football and got to thinking of Patrick Mahomes, quarterback Kansas City Chiefs.
Okay.
Well, he has a superstition that came out about him wearing the same pair of underwear on game day.
You're really going to go here?
Yeah. It is the underwear that his wife gave him. And he said, and if we're on a roll, we're on a winning streak, I can't wash them.
What?
I know.
Okay. So his belief is that if it's on game day, he's got to wear those particular pair of underwear.
That's right.
And if they're winning, they don't get washed.
That's exactly right. Yes. You wash them, you lose. So I guess that's the thinking.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And then I learned about Philadelphia kicker Jake Elliott. Now, I like his superstition ritual here.
All right.
The night before a game, he asked to eat 1 piece of cheesecake and 1 piece of pizza.
Hey, I like that.
I know.
Yeah, it's a great superstition.
I wish I knew what kind of pizza.
Yeah, I need that.
Yeah, right. But just one.
And then but then you win. Right?
And then you win.
That's the hope.
And then the next day you win. And I guess he's
maybe every time before I go film one of my reports, I should eat some cheesecake and what is it, pizza?
1 piece of each.
Yeah, let's do it.
And he's been doing it since his freshman year of college.
All right.
So it's like he I don't know, he did that and then started winning. They started winning and he's like, that's my go-to.
That's great.
So one of my favorites though, because you know how I am and how I like symmetry.
Yeah.
Okay. There is a former player, linebacker, Bernardrick McKinney.
Okay.
And he has to put all of his attire on game day on from left to right. So he puts his jersey on, left arm first, then right arm. Pants, left leg, right leg. Socks, left sock, right sock. I love that.
You know me. I'm not super into football. Call me un-American. But so I had no idea that this was a thing. So I wonder how many of our subscribers know that these professional athletes have these superstitions.
There have been polls out, and there's one particular one that says 65% of NFL fans say they also have game day rituals, superstitions.
Wow.
And they do that, whatever it is. And I didn't realize this one, that even at home, they sit in the very same spot every game day. So if it's like third cushion to the left on the couch, that's where I have to sit.
Wow.
I know, right?
That's so cool.
Or kissing a helmet or statue or figurine I have of my favorite player. Like
right before the game or something.
Right before the game. One guy I was reading about, I think he has to stand on his coffee table the last quarter of the game. And he said it drives his wife nuts.
That's crazy.
I know. But I was thinking about that.
Yeah.
Well, we have looked into, in other reports that we've done, intention and the power of intention, the power of putting not only your mind, but the minds of hundreds and hundreds of others on that same goal. And how I think Dean Radin has done some studies where he says it makes a difference.
So it makes me wonder then, on these, on Super Bowl Sunday, you have, I don't know how many it is, hundreds of thousands? Is it millions of people that watch that day?
I bet it's millions.
So if it's millions of people, we have so many hundreds of thousands or millions for one side,
right,
and so many for the other side. Do you think it makes a difference in the game?
Okay, so normally I would say there might be something to this. But with that, just like you brought up, with this absolute wide scale, we're talking probably millions of people. I don't know. Because you've got so many people having different intentions, right? Maybe one is like, my team's going to win, or my quarterback's going to throw the most, or whatever. And then you've got all these opposing intentions. I'm not sure. I do believe in the power of intention. Yeah. I will say that. I absolutely do believe in that focused power of intention. But I don't know if it makes a difference in these football games.
Yeah.
So, sorry, Super Bowl fans. I'm not sure.
Right.
Now, knowing that, me having said that, I can almost guarantee no one who has a game day ritual or a game day superstition is going to stop doing it.
Right.
Because I said, well, I'm not sure. Because they're like I said earlier, okay, but if I don't do it and they lose, this is my fault.
Yeah. Yeah. So I got to ask you, like I always do, what do you think about Notre Dame? Do you think that the Washington Hall is haunted?
I think there is something to that, because there was so much we couldn't put in this report.
Right.
And so I do think there is something to that. I think the Gipper, George Gipp, was bigger than life, and he has grown bigger and bigger, and I just think there's something about him still, part of him still being
at the university.
At that university.
Wow. All right. Well, thanks again.
You're welcome.
Our channel doesn't normally cover sports-related content, but the story of George Gipp is interesting, and the haunting of Washington Hall is something to think about. Speaking of hauntings, in 2014, a man named Robert Larson stayed the night at a supposed haunted house in Iowa. Before morning, he was airlifted to the hospital in critical condition from a stab wound to the chest. When asked what happened, he said that he was stabbed by a ghost. It's an extremely interesting story. We did a complete report on it, and if you'd like to see it, it's here.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching this report all the way to the end. And if you haven't gotten any rope merch yet, feel free to visit our store on Fourth Wall.